श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः। हरिः ओम्। सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम्। श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानामालयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादशङ्करं लोकशङ्करम्। शङ्कारूपेण मच्चित्तं पङ्कीकृतमभूद्यया किङ्करीयस्य सामागा शङ्कराचार्यमाश्रये। प्रह्लादवरदो देवो यो नृसिंहः परो हरिः नृसिंहोपासकं नित्यं तं नृसिंहगुरुं भजे। श्रीसच्चिदानन्दशिवाभिनव्यनृसिंहभारत्यभिधान्यतीन्द्रान् विद्यानिधीं मन्त्रनिधीं सदात्मनिष्ठान् भजे मानवशम्भुरूपान्। सदात्मध्याननिरतं वृषगेभ्यः पराङ्मुखं नौमि शास्त्रेषु निष्णातं चन्द्रशेखरभारतीं। विवेकिनं महाप्रज्ञं धैर्योदार्यक्षमानिधिं सदाभिनवपूर्वं तं विद्यातीर्थगुरुं भजे। भारतीकरुणापात्रं भारतीपदभूषणं भारतीपदमारूढं भारतीतीर्थमाश्रये। विद्याविनयसम्पन्नं वीतरागं विवेकिनं वन्दे वेदान्ततत्त्वज्ञं विदुशेखरभारतीम्। ओम। It gives me great pleasure to present the concluding talk on Atma Bodha, which is a seminal work by Adi Shankara Bhagavatpada, the foremost of our preceptors in the Advaita Parampara. While Adi Shankara Bhagavatpada was not the first preceptor of Advaita, and he was not the first preceptor because the teaching that he systematized, the teaching that he extracted from the Vedas is, as I said, from the Vedas. The original source is the Vedas, and therefore the teacher and the foremost guru of Advaita is Dakshinamurti, the Adi Guru himself, who in every kalpa imparts the wisdom that is embedded within the Upanishads, the Vedanta, to his disciples. And through his disciples, it spreads further and further. And in this kalpa, Adi Shankara Bhagavatpada is considered to be the foremost. And he is considered to be the foremost because he systematized that teaching through the Prasthanatraya Bhashyas, through various Prakarana Granthas. And this Atma Bodha is one such Prakarana Grantha. He has beautifully extracted the central message of the entirety of Vedic canon. Sarve Vedaha yat padamamananti, says the Shruti. The entirety of the Veda, not just the Jnana Kanda or the Upanishads, but even the Karma Kanda, has as its ultimate import, has its ultimate teaching, the ultimate message that reality is one and not dual. Ekameva Dvitiyam. And the glory of Adi Shankara Bhagavatpada is the infallible, undebatable, unquestionable, unchallengeable way in which he extracts that meaning from the Upanishads and presents it. Now, all of us may not be qualified to study the Prasthanatraya Bhashyas, and therefore to still ensure that people with limited Shastric knowledge, with limited knowledge of Purva Mimamsa, of Nyaya, of Vaisheshika, of Yoga Shastra, of Sankhya Darshana, people with limited Shastric knowledge are still able to understand the central Vedic message. Adi Shankara Bhagavatpada composed his Prakarana Granthas. Now, I'm spending a little longer talking about the glory of Adi Shankara Bhagavad-pada, because such is the occasion that we are celebrating the birth of one of the giants of Advaitic philosophy, without whom the entirety of the Advaitic philosophy may have been lost in the mists of time. Thankfully, Adi Shankara Bhagavad-pada appeared in the Kali Yuga to rescue the rest of humanity from falling prey to Nastika philosophies, Bodha philosophies, from falling prey to dry rationalization. And in doing so, he re-emphasized, re-established the centrality of Veda in the life of every Indian. And for that, we must be truly grateful. If that is all that he had done, that in itself would be a phenomenal achievement. But he did something even more. He established Amnaya Pithas in the four corners of the country to ensure that the teaching has continued in an unbroken line from his own time. That every Shankaracharya who graces the Amnaya Pithas is none other than an incarnation of Adi Shankara Bhagavad-pada himself, which is why we still refer to the heads of these Amnaya Pithas as Jagadguru Shankaracharya. And in doing so, we inadvertently, perhaps, without knowing it perhaps, we are stating that they are none other than the original Shankaracharya himself. With that, let us start looking at the verses that we covered in the last session. And the last verse was verse number 65. Sarvagam Satchidatmanam Jnana Chakshur Nirikshate Ajnana Chakshur Neksheta Bhaswantam Bhanumandhavat. In this verse, as we saw in the last session, Adi Shankara Bhagavad-pada illustrates once again for us the twofold vision of the Jnani and the Ajnani, the wise man and the ignorant person. The wise man looks at the world and realizes that the names and forms are mithya, unreal, and what is real behind the names and forms is the Satchidatma, the existence, consciousness, bliss that is Brahman. When we say a pot exists, the word pot and the form of the pot belong to the object. However, there is one other aspect of that pot that we mistakenly attribute to be a property of that pot. However, that is not a property of the pot. I'm talking about existence. Existence is an independent concept that pervades the pot. Every object that exists because of Brahman. It is Brahman that appears as existence of the object. And therefore, the wise man sees the names and forms and realizes that the names and forms are unreal, are mithya, and what is real is in fact the Sat behind the names and forms. And that's what he says. Adi Shankara Bhagavad-pada says, Sarvagam Satchidatmanam Jnana Chakshur Nirikshate. The one endowed with the eye of wisdom, Jnana Chakshuhu, such a person is able to clearly see, Nirikshate what? He's able to clearly see Sarvagam Satchidatmanam, that everything that exists is in fact Brahman. The object that we mistakenly think as existent is in fact just an unreal name and form. And what about the ignorant person? And Shankaracharya calls him an Ajnana Chakshuhu, the person endowed with the eye of ignorance. His eyes are clouded by the veil of ignorance. He is unable to see Brahman, Neksheta, Ajnana Chakshuhu, Neksheta, Na Ikshata. He is not able to see the reality behind the world, and his state is like that of a blind man who, even when the sun is shining right above him at noontime, is unable to perceive the sun because he lacks the means with which to perceive the sun. In the case of the blind man, he lacks eyes with which to see the sun. In the case of the ignorant person, he lacks the eye of wisdom that is bestowed upon us by our gurus, by the Shastra, and by Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana of that Shastra. And because those ignorant people lack that eye of wisdom, they are veiled by ignorance, and their eyes are blinded to the reality that is shining forth brightly right before them. We had seen this in the last session, and now we will look at the next verse, verse number 66. Shravanadhibiruddhita jnanagniparitapitah jiva sarvamanan muktah swarnavadyotate swayam. So, what Adi Shankara Bhagavatpada is saying here is that the jiva who he is being compared to an impure bar of gold. Now, when gold is covered with impurities, when it's mixed up with impurities, the natural luster, the natural shine, the luster of the gold is dimmed because of those impurities. However, when that impure bar of gold is subject to heat, that heat melts the gold, and then the goldsmith is able to skim away the impurities from the surface, leaving behind the original true gold which shines forth in all its brilliance. And that's what Shankaracharya says, Swarnavat Dyotate Swayam. Jivaha Swarnavat Dyotate Swayam. The jiva shines like gold itself. And why is the jiva not shining right now? And Shankaracharya says, because he is covered with impurities. And the impurities here are ahamkara, ego, mamakara, sense of possessiveness, raga, desire, and dvesha, hatred. These are the dushta chatushtayam, as they say in Shastra, the four wicked qualities that is present in some level within all of humanity. However, the truly wise ones who have realized the truth have done so by burning away these impurities. Just like the impurities of gold are burnt away by fire, the wise one burns away the impurities of the dushta chatushtayam, raga, dvesha, ahamkara, and mamakara. And what is that fire? And Shankaracharya says, Shravanadhibiruddhita jnanagniparitapitah. The fire is wisdom. It is the final akhandakara vritti. That is, it is the understanding that is born from the Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana of the Mahavakyas, the great sentences from the Upanishads that convey the oneness of Jiva and Brahman. There are 4 Mahavakyas that are very famous. However, in reality, there are many Mahavakyas through the various Upanishads. The four Mahavakyas are from the Rig Veda, from the Aitareya Upanishad, Prajnanam Brahma, from the Shukla Yajurveda, from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. The Mahavakya is Aham Brahmasmi. From the Samaveda, the Chandogya Upanishad of the Samaveda is the Mahavakya Tat Tvam Asi. And then finally, from the Atharva Veda, the Mundakopanishad, the Mahavakya is I am Atma Brahma. All of these convey the same reality. That is, the true nature of the Jiva and the true nature of Ishvara, the fundamental substance that forms the Jiva and that underlies Ishvara, is the Nirguna Brahman, is the pure, untainted, attributeless consciousness that is all pervading. So what about the world then? The world, as we saw, is simply a mirage. It is an appearance with no underlying reality of its own. In fact, it is Brahman that appears as the world. And therefore, the understanding, the wisdom that is born from the hearing, Shravanam, the contemplation, Mananam, and the meditation of the Mahavakyas. The meditation here being Vedantic meditation of Nididhyasana, through a constant performance of Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana. And Shravana is the systematic study of Vedanta under a guru. Manana is the resolution of doubts that may arise when one hears the true import of the Upanishads, that it is identity, abheda, that is being conveyed. When that is realized, one naturally has doubts about it. One sees the objects of the world, one encounters one's own limitations. How then can the Upanishad say that I, the Jiva, am the same as Parameshvara himself? How is it possible? In what sense does the Upanishad say it? How do I resolve this apparent contradiction between the Pramanas? The Vedas, which are Pramanas, are on one hand saying that Abheda is the reality, whereas my Vyavahara, my experience, everyday transactional reality is that I am a finite being in a vast universe with huge amount of limitations. How do I reconcile the teaching of the Veda with Pratyaksha Pramana, with Anumana Pramana? Right? The apparent information that my worldly means of knowledge are telling me, like, is that I am a limited being, whereas Shruti is saying that I, in fact, am an infinite being. How do I reconcile that? And the process of the reconciliation is Manana. It essentially involves understanding that reality is really of three types. There is the reality, apparent reality of the silver that appears in a shell. Sometimes when you're walking on the beach and it's a hot day and there are shells, when sunlight falls on the shells, they glisten like silver. And because they are round, they look like silver coins. Sometimes we are fooled and we go to pick it up, and then we realize it's actually not silver. It's in fact a shell. But for so long as we saw it, we thought that it was silver. And that is the pratibhasika reality, the reality that appears to exist. And then there is the vyavaharika reality. The vyavaharika reality is the reality of the world. The world seems to have transactional reality. When I go to sleep, I don't see the world, but when I wake up, it is the same world that is still there. And that appearance of the world will continue for so long as the true knowledge of the oneness of reality is not understood. And when it is understood, and when the body falls, there is ultimately only one entity that exists, which is Brahman. And that is called Videha Mukti. The Mukti that is present when the body is still alive, but one has had the knowledge that the reality is only one. When one knows Aham Brahmasmi while living, that is Jivan Mukti. Now, the world may continue to appear to the Jivan Mukta, but he pays very little attention to it because he knows that it is an unreal thing and he has no time for the unreality. He is reveling in the joy that is his own nature. So, the manana here involves understanding that there are three levels of reality. The reality that is experienced by the Jivan Mukta and the Videha Mukta. The reality that I and I alone am. And what kind of I is it? It's not the I that one associates with a tiny body and a tiny mind, a tiny intellect. Rather, it is that which shines in the body, which shines in the mind, which shines in the intellect. It is that because of which I know I am. That self-evident reality is Paramartha Satyam. So there are three realities. There is the Pratibhasika Satyam, the apparent reality of the illusion of silver in shell. There is the transactional reality of the world, which continues until the dawn of knowledge. That is called Vyavaharika Satyam. And there is ultimately the only true reality, Paramarthika Satyam, which is Brahman and Brahman alone. So, the resolution of contradiction between Shruti Pramana and perception and inference and logical reasoning, etc., is on the basis of Manana. That it appears, but it doesn't exist. What perception teaches me is only Vyavaharika Satyam. Perception is incapable of revealing a reality which is always present in all periods of time. All it can do is point to an object and say that exists now in the present. Whereas what Shruti is saying is that you, the consciousness, are that which appears in the object in the present. You, the consciousness, were present before the object. In fact, you, the consciousness, were present for all time. There is no beginning nor end to that reality. So, the reality revealed by Shruti Pramana is Paramarthika Satyam, whereas the reality revealed by Pratyaksha, perception, Anumana, logic, etc., are only transactional or Vyavaharika Satyam, or sometimes Pratibhasika Satyam, apparent reality. And that's how you resolve it through Manana. And then through Nididhyasana. Once these doubts have been resolved and one has had conviction in the teaching of the Upanishads, Nididhyasana is the gradual overcoming of the habitual tendencies that have been so deeply ingrained in our minds because of a beginningless samsara. We have been thinking ourselves as jiva since time immemorial. It is not just from this birth, it's from this birth and the birth before it and the birth before it. In fact, these cycles of births and deaths have been going on and on and on forever. And so, for a beginningless time, the jiva has been afflicted by ignorance, and that ignorance has constantly built a pattern of thinking that I am finite, I am limited, I need help, I need to depend on something else apart from myself for my security. So, even when one has the conviction that is born from Shravana and Manana, until one lives that reality, one imbibes that reality, one meditates upon it, soaks in it. It is very difficult to overcome these tendencies that have been built since time immemorial. But by persisting with that meditation for a long period of time, eventually is born the fire of wisdom. And that fire of wisdom, the Jnana Agni, burns through the defects that are present in the jiva. And that's what Shankaracharya says, Shravanadivihi uddipta Jnanagni paritapitaha jivaha sarva malan muktaha swarnavat dyotate swayam. He shines forth by himself when the fire that is knowledge is ablaze and has burnt away his impurities, the dushta chatushtayam. And that fire of wisdom is born through Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana. We will go to the next verse number 67. Hridakashodito hyatma bodhabhanustamo praharte sarvavyapi sarvadhari bhati bhasyat bhasagate khilam. So Shankaracharya says that the Bodha Bhanuhu, the sun that is Bodha, that is knowledge, that is born in the space that is in the heart. Hridakashodito Bodha Bhanuhu, the sun that is knowledge which has arisen in the space within the heart. The heart is the locus of the mind, and so poetically in Shastra, it's said that the sun has arisen in the sky within the heart. And what is that sun? It is Bodha Bhanuhu. It is the sun of wisdom that has risen in the heart. And what happens then? When that happens, the Atma, which is Sarvavyapi, all-pervading, Sarvadhari, all-sustaining, it shines forth. Bhati bhasayate akhilam. It shines forth and it illuminates everything. And so here Shankaracharya compares the all-pervading, all-supporting, self-evident and all-illuminating Atma to the sun that destroys the darkness. And what is that darkness? Tamopahriti, Shankaracharya says. The tama here is nothing but ignorance. And so when Atma Bodha arises in the mind, the self that illuminates all destroys the darkness of ignorance. So with that, we have covered the teaching of verse number 67. Now we can look at verse number 68, the final culmination of the last 2.5 years of a study of Atma Bodha, verse number 68. Digdeshakaladhyanapeksha sarvagam Shritadihirnitya sukham niranjanam Yasvatmatirtham bhajate vinishkriyah sa sarvavit sarvagato mruto bhavet. With this verse, Shankaracharya concludes the Atma Bodha by comparing Atma to a tirtha. He says Atma Tirtham. It is so normally in our religion, in Sanatana Dharma, we have a lot of sacred rivers. The Ganges, the Yamuna, Tungabhadra, Kaveri, Narmada, and so on and so forth. And taking a dip in these glorious waters gives many benefits. It destroys our sins, it purifies our soul. And Shankaracharya says that the Atma is like the waters of a sacred river or a pond. The Jiva, who through countless immemorial births has been traversing from body to body to body. Sometimes he is within the body of a plant, immobile, serving as food for animals. Sometimes he is within the body of an insect with a very small, painful lifespan. Sometimes he is in the body of an animal, roaming from place to place in search for food. Very rarely do we get the blessing, the boon of a human body. It is only as a human being that one has the possibility for moksha. And so, it is incumbent upon us to use this birth fruitfully to understand the teaching of the Upanishads and get that knowledge which frees us from this apparently never ending cycle of samsara. It ends when that knowledge arises, and therefore it is incumbent upon us to make efforts. As Jagadguru Sri Sri Mahasannidhanam has said, unless we make that effort, we will never succeed. And if we make that effort, we will succeed for certain at some birth. It may be in this birth if we are sufficiently advanced. And if we are not advanced, that is still fine. Any effort made in this direction will stay and will help and will keep aggregating until what is a tiny spark becomes a massive conflagration and burns through years and years of mental baggage. And so Shankaracharya compares the Atma to the Tirtha, the Jiva who has been traversing, who is tired after traversing through so many different bodies, through the beginningless desert that is samsara, stumbling from one calamity to another. Finally, due to some accrued merit in some past life, manages to reach the oasis that is a enlightened Guru. And that enlightened Guru kindles within him the knowledge that is hidden within the Upanishads. And through that Guru's benevolent teaching, the Jiva, the lost soul, is guided to the blissful waters that is the Self. And in doing that, this verse is describing the nature of the Atma. Essentially, it says it is sarvagam. It is unlimited by the confines of time and space. It is the very essence of all creation. And being the essence of all creation, no pair of opposites affect it. Whether it is cold or heat, pleasure or pain, birth or death, nothing can afflict that Atma. It is Nitya Sukham. It is the nature of eternal happiness. It is Niranjanam. It is free from all forms of defects. And what are defects? It is the duality, it is essentially the Dushta Chatushtaya that we spoke about, the Raga Dvesha, the Ahamkara, the Mamakara. It is Ajnana. None of these are really present in the Atma. They have the same Vyavaharika Satyam that the world has. And when knowledge arises, all these defects automatically are sublimated, and all that remains is the sacred waters of the Atma Tirtha. And so this verse says, Digdesha Kaladi Anapeksha Sarvagam. It is all pervading without limitations of time and space. Shritadi Hrinnitya Sukham Niranjanam. It is free from the duality such as cold and heat. It is eternally blissful. It is free from defects. Yes Swatma Tirtham Bhajate Vinishkriyaha Sa Sarvavit Sarvagato Mrito Bhavet. That wise person who is dispassionate and who pursues this Atma Tirtha, who has a single-minded devotion, bhajate, he says, who has a single-minded devotion towards the Atma, but it is not someone without the qualifications. The word Vinishkriyaha refers to the sadhana chatushtaya sampatti, which we talked about in the very first verse of Atma Bodha some 2.5 years ago, being viveka, discrimination, vairagya, dispassion, mumukshutvam, a deep burning desire for liberation, and shamadhi shatka sampatti, the sixfold qualifications of the mind, such as control of the senses, control of the body, etc. And so, the qualified candidate who is endowed with the sadhana chatushtaya sampatti, who with a single-minded focus pursues the Atma, attains the Atma Tirtham through knowledge, and having attained it, he becomes the very thing that he was seeking. And here, the becoming is a figurative becoming. Essentially, he realizes that he was the very Brahman that he has been seeking for so long. And that is revealed here through the words Sa sarvavite sarvagato amrito bhavet. He becomes all seeing. He is omniscient. How is he omniscient? He is omniscient because he is the Atma that illuminates all. He is sarvagata. How is he sarvagata? How is he all pervading? Not within a body. It is because he realizes that he is not some entity located within the body. Rather, the body and the world are located within him, consciousness. He is all pervading. And he is deathless. He becomes Amrita, immortal, free from death. How is that? Because he realizes that what is capable of dying is only the body-mind complex. It is not the Atma. He, the consciousness, is free from death. With that, we bring the Atma Bodha lecture series to a conclusion. I thank the organizers, Sringeri Guru Bandhava, for giving me the opportunity to revisit these verses in your company, and through that to clarify some of the points for my own benefit. I hope that it has also helped those that have watched this. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to meeting all of you at some time in the future. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. It is a pleasure for all of us in thanking Shri Venkatraghavan on the concluding day of his lecture series on Atma Bodham by Bhagavad-Padacharyal. We all know that Bhagavad-Padacharyal have written commentaries on the Prasthanatraya, and in the next level he has written Prakarana Granthas for Jignasus to get closer to the Bhashyas. And in the third level he has written a lot of Stotra Granthas that will in turn help the Shrotas to get closer to the Prakarana Granthas. And here we are in a concluding session of a Prakarana Grantha written by Bhagavad-Padacharyal named Atma Bodham, and which was lectured by Shri Venkatraghavan ji. As a Sringeri Guru Bandhava, there will be no introduction required to Shri Venkatraghavan. We all know that he is a Priya Sishya of Jagadguru Shri Bharatitirtha Mahaswamigal, and also disciple of Mahopadhyaya Shri Manidravid Shastrigal and also Shri Paramarthananda Maharaj. So having related to all these giants in the field of Vedanta, both Mahopadhyaya Manidravid Shastrigal and Paramarthananda Maharaj are giants in the field of Vedanta, and we now have a student who have studied from these great scholars. So from the year 2020, Venkatraghavan ji has been delivering these lectures, and which is getting concluded today. And to talk about the lecture, we all know Bhagavad Acharya himself refers to a lot of examples throughout Atma Bodha, and Venkatraghavan ji, adding to the examples given by Bhagavad Pada, has put in a lot of effort in making the concepts pretty clear for even a beginner in the field of Vedanta. Without Atma Bodha, we will not be able to step inside the core texts of Vedantam, which is pretty clear to all of us. So, Shri Venkatraghavan ji has taken the strain amidst all his office works, hectic travels. He has stayed committed to this endeavor of delivering lectures on Atma Bodham. So, on behalf of the entire Guru Bandhavas, Sringeri Guru Bandhavas, I take the pleasure of thanking Shri Venkatraghavan ji. So, I request him to continue giving such lectures in Prakarana Granthas in the near future also. So, once again, thank you Venkatraghavan ji. We have enjoyed your lecture series. Looking forward to hear a lot from you. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.